The freezer door slammed shut, and the lock clicked with finality. Most people would have panicked, screaming until their voices gave out, but Simone Bennett simply closed her eyes and steadied her breath. The -18 degrees Celsius air bit at her skin, sharp and relentless. She didn't look like a woman married to billions. In her simple black work dress and worn flats, she looked like exactly what her boss believed her to be: disposable. "Lord, give me strength," she whispered, her breath forming clouds in the darkness. She thought of the words she'd memorized years ago. "She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come." She wasn't standing in this industrial kitchen because she needed the money. Her husband's name alone could buy this entire block. She was here because she believed in the dignity of work, in serving others, and in using her own 2 hands to make a difference. While Jersey City slept, she fed the homeless from the back entrance. While her boss screamed at the staff, she quietly covered their mistakes. While other women in her position lounged in penthouses, she scrubbed floors and managed inventory with the same dedication she brought to the charity board meetings she attended under her married name. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support encourages us to bring more awesome stories like Simone and Joon-Woo's journey to life. If this tale of faith, strength, and unexpected love moved you, hit that notification bell so you never miss when we drop the next chapter. Her boss, a petty tyrant drunk on the small power of a restaurant manager, saw her humility as weakness. He saw her quietness as fear. He had no idea that the woman shivering in his walk-in freezer was the wife of Park Joon-Woo, the Korean billionaire whose empire stretched from Seoul to Manhattan, whose business rivals whispered his name with equal parts respect and terror. As frost began to crystallize on her eyelashes, a sound cut through the muffled silence, the deep rumble of an engine, then another. Then the unmistakable hydraulic hiss of car doors opening in unison. It wasn't one vehicle. It was a motorcade. Simone opened her eyes in the darkness and smiled, even as her body trembled from the cold. Her husband had a sixth sense when it came to her safety. And somewhere beyond these steel walls, Park Joon-Woo had just realized his wife hadn't come home. The man who had built an empire on calculated moves and strategic patience was about to make this personal. And when Joon-Woo made things personal, entire organizations crumbled. The boss who locked her in the freezer was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. You don't touch a billionaire's wife and walk away unscathed. More than that, you don't harm a woman whose worth exceeds rubies, whose strength runs deeper than any vault, and whose husband would burn the world down to keep her safe. The temperature dropped another degree. But Simone Bennett wasn't afraid anymore. She was simply waiting, because she knew exactly who was coming. The alarm buzzed at 4:45 a.m., but Simone was already awake. She slipped from beneath the silk sheets of their penthouse bedroom, careful not to disturb Joon-Woo's sleep. He'd come home late again, smelling of expensive cologne and the weight of negotiations that would reshape markets. She watched him for a moment in the darkness. This man who commanded boardrooms and made grown men nervous with a single glance, and felt her heart swell with quiet love. In the dimly lit living room, she knelt on the plush carpet, folded her hands, and prayed. For his safety in a world of sharks wearing suits, for wisdom in decisions that affected thousands, for their future. The words came soft and steady, a ritual as essential to her as breathing. By 5:30, she was dressed in simple black slacks and a white button-down, her hair pulled into a neat ponytail. She left a note on the kitchen counter, "Gone to work. I love you," and slipped out into the pre-dawn cold of Jersey City. The Gilded Table sat on the waterfront, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering million-dollar views of the Manhattan skyline. Simone entered through the back, greeted by the warm smile of Miguel, the head dishwasher. "Morning, Ms. Bennett. You're early again." "The early bird feeds the multitude, Miguel." She tied on her apron, already scanning the prep station. By 6, She was elbow-deep in inventory, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. The same hands that had signed charity checks for 6 figures the night before, now counting bags of flour and checking expiration dates. The kitchen staff gravitated toward her. She remembered their children's names, covered shifts when they were sick, brought them leftovers she claimed were going to waste anyway. They didn't know those leftovers came from her own grocery runs. Then Mr. Sterling arrived, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Mr. Sterling's office reeked of stale coffee and cheap cologne. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled like a man who believed he held all the power in the room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his face as he slid a folder across the desk toward Simone. "New payroll structure," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Effective immediately. Kitchen staff gets cut 15% across the board. Servers take a 10% reduction. You'll process it by Friday." Simone opened the folder, her eyes scanning the numbers with practiced efficiency. She'd managed budgets 10 times this size for her husband's charitable foundation. She knew exactly what she was looking at, and it made her stomach turn. "This isn't about the budget," she said quietly, her finger tracing the line at the bottom that showed Sterling's proposed bonus increase. "You're taking from people who can barely afford rent to pad your own pockets." Sterling's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sorry. Did I ask for your opinion? You're the operations manager, not the ethics committee. Process the changes or clean out your desk." Simone closed the folder and stood, her movements calm and deliberate. She thought of the single mothers working the line, the college students washing dishes to pay tuition, the immigrants sending money home to families they hadn't seen in years. She thought of the scripture her grandmother had taught her. "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves." "No," she said simply. Sterling's face flushed red. "Excuse me? I won't do it. These people work hard. They deserve fair wages, not to be robbed so you can afford another vacation." Her voice remained steady, almost gentle, but there was steel underneath. "Find another way to balance your budget, or find someone else to do your dirty work." The air in the room shifted, charged with the kind of tension that precedes a storm. Sterling stood slowly, his hands flat on the desk, and Simone knew she'd just made herself a target. The blizzard hit Jersey City at 9 p.m., turning the waterfront into a wall of white. Inside the Gilded Table, the dinner rush had finally ended, leaving only the hum of industrial dishwashers and the clatter of closing duties. Simone was wiping down the bar when Sterling's voice cut through the kitchen. "Bennett, back stockroom, now!" She found him standing by the walk-in freezer, clipboard in hand, his expression twisted into something that resembled satisfaction. He'd been looking for an opportunity all week, ever since she'd quietly corrected his math in front of the weekend staff, saving him from a costly ordering mistake he'd tried to blame on the sous chef. "Inventory's off," he said, not looking at her. "Someone's been sloppy. Since you're so good at pointing out other people's errors, you can spend the next hour doing a full recount. Every box, every shelf." Simone glanced at the freezer, then at the windows where snow was already piling against the glass. "Mr. Sterling, the storm—" "Did I ask about the weather?" He opened the heavy door and Arctic air rolled out like a living thing. "You've got 1 hour. If the count isn't perfect, you can explain it to corporate tomorrow, if you even still have a job tomorrow." She recognized the trap immediately. An hour in sub-zero temperatures, wearing only her work dress and thin cardigan. And the overnight crew had already left. The kitchen would be empty. He could claim she'd volunteered, that she'd insisted on accuracy, that he had no idea she'd stayed so long. Simone stepped inside without argument. She'd learned long ago that men like Sterling fed on resistance, on fear, on the satisfaction of watching people break. She wouldn't give him that. The door sealed behind her with a mechanical thunk. Through the small window, she saw Sterling pull out his phone, angling it to watch the security camera feed. He wanted to see her panic. wanted to watch her pound on the door, begging to be let out. Instead, Simone walked calmly to the far corner, away from the camera's direct view, and knelt on the frozen concrete floor. Her breath came out in visible clouds. Her fingers were already going numb, but her voice was steady. "Yeah. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." She prayed for warmth, yes, but also for Sterling, for the brokenness in him that made cruelty feel like power. She prayed for the other workers who'd suffered under his tyranny. She prayed for her husband, who she knew would be finishing a late meeting, who would check his watch soon and wonder why she hadn't texted. Outside the freezer, Sterling stared at his phone screen, his satisfaction curdling into confusion. The woman wasn't moving, wasn't crying. She was just kneeling there, peaceful, like the cold couldn't touch her. It unsettled him more than screaming ever could. He didn't know that 20 miles away, in a Manhattan boardroom, Park Joon-Woo had just glanced at his phone and frowned. And the GPS tracker embedded in his wife's necklace, a gift she wore every day, hadn't moved in 45 minutes, and it was reading 18 degrees below zero. The boardroom fell silent as Park Joon-Woo raised his hand, cutting off the CFO mid-sentence. 12 executives froze, presentations half-finished, knowing better than to question when their chairman went still like that. His eyes had glazed over, focused on something none of them could see, and his jaw had set in a way that made the temperature in the room drop several degrees. Something was wrong. He couldn't explain it. This instinct that had kept him alive through hostile takeovers and backroom negotiations that would have destroyed lesser men. Some called it business acumen. His mother used to call it a gift. But Joon-Woo knew the truth. It only activated for one person. And the same way a compass needle finds true north, his entire being oriented itself around Simone's safety. Without a word, he pulled out his phone and opened the tracking app he'd installed 2 years ago. Not to control her, never that. Simone had laughed when he'd given her the delicate gold cross necklace, calling him overprotective. "It's beautiful, June," she'd said, fastening it around her neck. "But I can take care of myself." He'd kissed her forehead and said nothing, because they both knew the truth. In his world, loving someone made them a target, and he'd already lost too much to chance. The GPS location loaded. His blood turned to ice. The Gilded Table, the same coordinates. For 14 hours straight. Simone never stayed at work past midnight, even on inventory nights, even during holiday rushes. She was home by 1 a.m. at the latest. It was 2:47 p.m. the next day. "Sir?" His assistant's voice seemed to come from underwater. "Should we continue?" Joon-Woo stood, buttoning his suit jacket with mechanical precision. His face revealed nothing. The same mask he'd worn since he was 17, since he'd learned that showing emotion was showing weakness. But his hands, those steady hands that signed billion-dollar contracts without a tremor, were shaking. "Reschedule everything," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm, effective immediately. He was already moving toward the door, pulling up his driver's contact, then his head of security. The executives exchanged nervous glances. They'd seen Park Joon-Woo angry before. Cold, calculated, devastating. But this was different. This was a man whose entire world had just tilted off its axis. His driver answered before the first ring finished. "The restaurant," Joon-Woo said. "Now. And bring everyone." 14 hours. His Simone, his wife, his heart walking around outside his body, hadn't moved in 14 hours. Every instinct screamed that she was in danger, and Park Joon-Woo had built an empire by trusting his instincts. The elevator descended. His reflection stared back from the polished doors, composed, controlled, lethal. But inside, a war drum was beating. Someone had touched what was his, and they were about to learn why you never, ever cornered a watchman's treasure. The glass doors of the Gilded Table didn't open. They exploded inward as Park Joon-Woo stepped through them. He didn't need to touch them. One of his men did that. Joon-Woo simply walked, and the world rearranged itself around him. He was still in his suit from the board meeting, charcoal gray with a white shirt open at the collar. No tie. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with tension, and a watch that cost more than most people's cars. His jaw was set so tight it could have been carved from stone, and his eyes, dark, focused, lethal, swept the dining room like a predator identifying prey. The dinner service froze. Waiters stopped mid-step. A woman's fork clattered against her plate. Even the soft jazz playing through the speakers seemed to lower in volume, as if the building itself recognized the shift in power. Mr. Sterling emerged from the kitchen, irritation already twisting his features. "Sir, we're in the middle of—" The words died in his throat the moment he saw Joon-Woo's face. Joon-Woo didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Where is she?" Sterling's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. His hands, which had shoved clipboards at Simone and screamed at kitchen staff with such confidence, now trembled visibly. I don't know who. My wife." The two words came out quiet, controlled, and absolutely devastating. "Simone Bennett. She works here. You locked her somewhere." Joon-Woo took one step forward. Just one. Sterling took 3 steps back and hit the host stand. "I'm going to ask you one more time, and I suggest you think very carefully before you answer. Where is she?" Behind Joon-Woo, 4 men in dark suits stood with their hands folded, utterly still, utterly silent. They didn't need to threaten. Their presence was the threat. Sterling's face had gone from red to gray. His eyes darted toward the kitchen, then back to Joon-Woo. And in that half-second of hesitation, he sealed his fate. "The freezer," he whispered. "She's in the walk-in freezer." Joon-Woo's expression didn't change. That was somehow worse than rage. He extended his hand, palm up. "Keys, now." Sterling's fingers fumbled with the key ring at his belt. They shook so badly he dropped them twice before finally placing them in Joon-Woo's hand. Joon-Woo's fingers closed around the keys like a verdict being rendered. Then he turned and walked toward the kitchen, and every step sounded like a countdown to the end of everything Sterling had ever built. Joon-Woo didn't ask permission. He didn't negotiate with the trembling manager who had finally produced the keys with shaking hands. He simply took them, his movements precise and controlled, the kind of control that came before devastation. His security team had already cleared the kitchen, employees pressed against the walls, their eyes wide as they watched the man in the tailored suit and rolled sleeves move through their workspace like he owned it. Because in about 30 minutes, he would. The freezer door opened with a rush of frigid air that would have stopped most men in their tracks. Joon-Woo didn't hesitate. He stepped inside, his expensive shoes crunching on the frost-covered floor, and found her exactly where he knew she would be, in the corner, knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped around herself, but her eyes open, conscious, alive. Simone. Her name left his lips like a prayer answered. She looked up at him, her lips pale, her body trembling so violently she could barely speak. But somehow she managed a small smile. "You're here." "Always." He was already shrugging off his suit jacket, wrapping it around her shoulders as he knelt beside her. The cashmere was still warm from his body heat. His hands moved over her arms, her face, checking for injury, for frostbite, for any sign that he was too late. Her skin was ice cold, but her pulse was steady beneath his fingers. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, one arm beneath her knees, the other supporting her back. She curled into his chest immediately, seeking the warmth that radiated from him, and he held her tighter, his jaw clenched so hard it ached. He had faced armed rivals across negotiation tables. He had stared down hostile takeovers and corporate warfare without flinching. But carrying his wife out of a freezer where someone had left her to suffer made something dark and ancient rise in his chest, the kind of rage that didn't shout, but simply acted. As he stepped out of the freezer into the kitchen's harsh fluorescent light, every eye turned to them. The staff saw their quiet coworker cradled in the arms of a man who looked like he commanded empires. The manager saw his career ending in real time. Simone's hand came up weakly, catching the edge of Joon-Woo's collar. Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper, but it stopped him mid-stride. "Don't let him hurt the others, June." He looked down at her, this woman who was shivering from hypothermia, who had been locked away like she was worthless, and her first words weren't a demand for vengeance. And they were protection for people who had done nothing to save her. His expression softened, just for a moment, just for her. "I won't," he promised quietly. Then he carried her past the manager without a single glance, because men like that didn't deserve his attention. They only deserved consequences. Simone sat wrapped in cashmere blankets on the leather sofa, a mug of hot tea cradled between her still trembling hands. The penthouse stretched around her like a fortress of glass and steel, the Manhattan skyline glittering beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. She'd been home for 3 hours, medically cleared, but still carrying the cold in her bones. The shivers came in waves, unpredictable and violent, remnants of those brutal hours in the freezer. Joon-Woo stood across the room, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid Korean. His voice was calm, but Simone had been married to him long enough to recognize the deadly precision in his tone. He wasn't shouting. He never shouted. That's what made him terrifying. When Park Joon-Woo whispered, "Empires fell," he ended the call and turned to face her. His expression was unreadable, carved from stone. "Sterling will be gone by morning," he said simply. "No one will find him. No one will ask questions." Simone set down her tea carefully. "June." "He locked you in a freezer, Simone. He watched you through the security camera like it was entertainment." His jaw tightened, the only crack in his composure. "Men have died for less." "I know what he did." Her voice was steady despite the shivers. "And I know what you're capable of. But that's not the answer." Joon-Woo crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt before her, his hands gripping the edges of the sofa on either side of her knees. Up close, she could see the fear still lingering in his eyes, the same raw terror that had consumed him when he'd found her barely conscious in that frozen tomb. "He tried to kill you." "He tried to break me," Simone corrected. She reached out and touched his face, her palm warm against his cheek. "But I'm not broken. And if you erase him like he never existed, what does that make us? What does that make you? Powerful enough to protect what's mine." "I'm not a possession to protect, Joon-Woo. I'm your partner." She leaned forward, her forehead nearly touching his. A Proverbs 31 woman doesn't just destroy her enemies, she transforms the battlefield. She turns cursing into blessing, darkness into light. He closed his eyes, his breath coming hard. "Then what do you want me to do?" Simone smiled, and there was steel beneath the gentleness. "I want him to watch his world crumble, piece by piece, knowing exactly who brought the walls down. I want justice, not vengeance. I want him to lose everything he values the way he tried to take everything from me. But I want him alive to see it, to learn from it, to carry the weight of what he did for the rest of his life." Joon-Woo opened his eyes and stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You're terrifying," he whispered. "I learned from the best." She kissed his forehead. "Make the calls, but we do this my way. Transform, don't destroy." He nodded slowly, and in that moment the most powerful man in 2 hemispheres surrendered completely to his wife's wisdom. Because he'd built an empire on fear. But she was teaching him how to rule with something far more dangerous: grace. Joon-Woo moved in absolute silence. That was how empires shifted hands, Not with announcements, but with signatures on documents most people would never see. It took him 72 hours to dismantle everything Marcus Sterling thought he owned. The first day, Joon-Woo's acquisition team purchased the building lease from the property management company. By noon, they owned the liquor distribution contract. By evening, the restaurant's primary food supplier had been quietly absorbed into a subsidiary corporation that answered directly to Park Enterprises. The second day, the investors who held Sterling's operational loans received buyout offers they couldn't refuse, not because the numbers were astronomical, but because the alternative was watching their other business interests crumble under the weight of a billionaire's focused attention. The third day, Sterling received a phone call. Corporate wanted to see him. There was talk of expansion, of regional management opportunities, of rewarding his leadership. He straightened his tie in the mirror and smiled. Finally, the recognition he deserved. He walked into the conference room on the third floor expecting handshakes and champagne. Instead, he found Simone Bennett sitting at the head of the mahogany table, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than his car. Her gold wedding band caught the light. The chandelier earrings he'd never noticed before suddenly made perfect sense. Behind her stood Joon-Woo, hands clasped, expression unreadable. "Have a seat, Marcus," Simone said, her voice steady and cold. "We need to discuss your termination." Sterling's face drained of color. His legs moved on instinct, carrying him to the chair opposite her like a man walking toward his own execution. "I believe you're familiar with workplace safety violations," Simone continued, sliding a folder across the table, "particularly those involving industrial freezers." The sign went up on a cold March morning, elegant gold letters against deep burgundy. The Ruby. Simone stood across the street with a coffee in her hands, watching the installation crew secure it above the entrance. The restaurant looked different now. The windows had been cleaned until they sparkled. The brick had been pressure washed. Even the sidewalk seemed to stand straighter, as if the building itself knew it had been given a second chance. Joon-Woo stood beside her in silence, his hands in the pockets of his tailored coat. He had wanted to rename it after her, something grand and obvious. She had refused. "Rubies are quiet," she'd told him, "but their value doesn't need to be announced. People who know, know." He hadn't argued. He rarely did anymore, not when it came to her vision for this place. Inside, the kitchen staff gathered for the first official meeting under new ownership. Simone walked in, wearing a simple black dress and her gold cross necklace, the same one Joon-Woo had given her years ago. The room fell silent. These were people who had watched her scrub floors, who had seen her defend them against Sterling's cruelty, who had found her unconscious in the freezer. Now she stood before them as their employer, and the weight of that transition hung in the air like incense. "I'm not here to give speeches," Simone began, her voice steady and warm. "I'm here to work alongside you. Fair wages start today. No more stolen tips. No more unpaid overtime. No more fear." She paused, letting her words settle. "This restaurant will be a place where people are treated with dignity, where the food we serve comes from hands that are valued, not exploited. We're going to feed this neighborhood the way it deserves to be fed, with excellence and with love." One of the dishwashers, an older man named Carlos who had worked there for 15 years, started clapping. Then another joined. Then the entire room erupted in applause that shook the walls. Joon-Woo watched from the corner booth, the same spot Sterling used to occupy when he wanted to intimidate the staff. But where Sterling had loomed like a vulture, Joon-Woo sat quietly, almost invisible. He watched his wife move through the kitchen, her hands gesturing as she explained the new profit-sharing model, her face bright with purpose. He had bought her buildings. He had given her access to accounts that could fund small nations. But watching her now, he understood something that humbled him completely. His wealth had never been the point. Simone didn't need his money to be powerful. She needed his support to build something his money could never buy. A place where grace lived in every transaction, where justice was served alongside every meal. She caught his eye across the room and smiled. He nodded once, a gesture of reverence. His empire had made him feared, but her spirit made him want to be worthy. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support encourages us to bring more awesome stories like Simone and Joon-Woo's journey to life. If this tale of faith, strength, and unexpected love moved you, hit that notification bell so you never miss when we drop the next chapter. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that true power isn't found in wealth or status, but in the courage to live with dignity and grace. Your engagement helps us create more stories that celebrate resilience, redemption, and the kind of love that changes everything. Thank you for being here, and thank you for believing that every person's story matters. We'll see you in the next one.